The alley smelled like death and gasoline. Don Vero, the tattooed king of New York's underworld, the man who'd crushed empires with his bare hands, was on his knees in the rain, bleeding out. 10 guns were pointed at his head. His own brother had sent them. He'd survived 30 years of violence, but tonight, betrayed by his own blood, the lion was about to fall. He closed his eyes, accepted it, waited for the bullet. Then he heard it, a growl, low, primal, cutting through the thunder like a promise of violence. 10 hardened killers spun around, fingers on triggers. What they saw made absolutely no sense. A scarred street dog, massive, battle-worn, eyes glowing amber in the rain, stood at the mouth of the alley, teeth bared. And behind the beast stood a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Oversized brown jacket hanging off her tiny frame, dirty face, tangled hair plastered to her cheeks. But her eyes burned with something these men had never seen in a child. Not fear, not innocence, pure, calculated defiance. A kid? One assassin laughed, lowering his weapon. And a mutt? This is what's gonna save you, Don Vero. The girl didn't flinch. She looked at the bleeding Mafia boss, then at the dog, then back at the 10 men who'd come to kill him. She tilted her head, and when she spoke, her voice was cold, steady, impossibly calm for someone her age. Talon, she whispered. Attack. What happened next shocked every man in that alley. What they didn't know, what Don Vero was about to discover, was that this wasn't just a random street kid playing hero. This little girl with the fierce eyes and her loyal dog were about to turn his entire world upside down. Because she knew exactly who he was. She'd seen his face before, in a locket, in photos her father kept before Don Vero murdered him 5 years ago. And tonight, standing between a broken child and 10 killers, the most dangerous man in New York was about to learn that sometimes the people you destroy are the only ones who can save you. Welcome to Story Lens TV, where every story reveals the truth hiding in the shadows. If this story has you hooked, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss a tale like this, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and I love knowing this story found you. Now, let's rewind to where this impossible night really began. To the moment when power, loyalty, and redemption collided in the rain. 20 years. That's how long it had taken Don Vero to build his empire. 20 years of calculated violence, strategic alliances, and the kind of fear that made grown men cross the street when they saw him coming. He'd started as a hungry kid from the Bronx with nothing but rage and ambition, and he'd clawed his way to the top of New York's underworld with his bare hands. The lion tattoo on his neck wasn't just decoration. It was a warning, promise, a legacy written in blood and broken bones. Now, at 38, kneeling in a filthy alley with rain mixing with his blood, Don Vero realized that empires built on fear could crumble just as fast. His expensive suit, custom-tailored, Italian wool, worth more than most people's cars, was shredded and soaked through. The bullet had gone clean through his side, just above his hip. Not fatal if he got help soon. But in this alley, surrounded by 10 of his brother's men, soon wasn't looking likely. His hands, covered in intricate tattoos that told the story of every territory he'd conquered, every rival he'd eliminated, were slick with rain and blood as he pressed them against the wound. The pain was sharp, insistent, but it wasn't the bullet that hurt most. It was the betrayal. 3 hours ago, his phone had buzzed. Dante, his younger brother, the only family he had left after their parents died in the 90s. Dante's voice had been urgent, almost panicked. We got a problem, Vero. The Castellanos are moving on our Red Hook territory. We need to meet. Tonight. Just you and me. Brothers like the old days. Don Vero should have known better. Should have heard the lie beneath the urgency. But Dante was blood. And in Don Vero's world, blood was supposed to mean something. He'd gone to the meeting spot alone as requested. No security. No backup. Just 2 brothers settling a territorial dispute the way they used to before the empire got so big. The moment he'd turned into this alley off Delancey Street, he'd known. The setup was textbook. Narrow passage. No exit routes. High walls on both sides. The kind of place you only went if you were meeting death or delivering it. Vic the Knife Castellano had stepped out first, flanked by 9 others. All armed. All smiling that specific smile men wore when they knew they had you. "Sorry, Don Vero," Vic had said, not sounding sorry at all. "Nothing personal. Just business." Then they'd opened fire. Don Vero had managed to draw his own weapon, get off 3 shots before the first bullet caught him. He'd taken down 2 of them, muscle memory from decades of survival, but 10 against 1 were bad odds even for him. His gun had clicked empty. He'd backed up against the brick wall, feeling the rain hammer down, feeling his life drain out with every heartbeat. And now Vic was standing over him, 9mm pointed at his head, rainwater dripping off the barrel. "Any last words, Don Vero?" Don Vero looked up at him, dark eyes calm despite everything. He'd always known it would end in the street. That's how it went in this life. You either died in a cage or you died in the gutter. He'd chosen the gutter. "Tell Dante he'll never fill my shoes," Don Vero rasped, his voice still carrying that edge of command even as his life leaked away into the dirty water. "He's a snake, and snakes get crushed." Vic laughed, the sound cold and sharp like breaking glass. "Dante's already taken your seat, old man. He's been sitting in it for months, making moves, cutting deals. You've been yesterday's king for a while now. You just didn't know it. Now." The growl cut him off mid-sentence. It started low, rumbling like distant thunder, but it wasn't distant at all. It was right behind them, close enough that Don Vero could feel it in his chest, vibrating through the rain-soaked air. 10 hardened killers, men who'd murdered, extorted, and terrorized their way through life, spun around with their weapons raised. What they saw didn't make any sense. A dog stood at the mouth of the alley, but not just any dog. This was a German Shepherd mix, massive and battle-scarred, with matted fur plastered to its muscular frame by the rain. Its teeth were bared in a snarl that promised violence, lips pulled back to expose fangs that looked like they'd torn through flesh before. Its eyes glowed amber in the dim streetlight, reflecting something primal and dangerous. But that wasn't the impossible part. Behind the dog, partially hidden by its bulk, stood a little girl. She was tiny, couldn't have been more than 8 years old, maybe 60 pounds soaking wet. She wore a brown jacket that was at least 3 sizes too big, hanging off her small frame like a tent. Her face was dirty, streaked with rain and grime. Her hair, dark and tangled, was plastered to her cheeks. She was clutching a rusted metal pipe in one small hand. But it was her eyes that made Don Vero's breath catch. Dark, fierce, burning with something he'd never seen in a child. Not fear, not innocence. Something harder. Something that had seen too much and survived anyway. One of Vic's men, a stocky enforcer named Jimmy, lowered his weapon slightly and laughed. "You gotta be kidding me. A kid? And a mutt? Boss, this is what's gonna save Don Vero." The others joined in, nervous laughter echoing off the alley walls. But Don Vero noticed something. The girl wasn't laughing. She wasn't crying. She wasn't doing anything a normal 8-year-old would do when faced with 10 armed killers. She was studying them, calculating, her eyes moving from face to face, taking inventory. Then she looked at Don Vero. Their eyes met, and in that moment he saw recognition flash across her features. She knew him. Somehow, impossibly, the street kid knew exactly who he was. She tilted her head slightly, then looked back at the dog. When she spoke, her voice was steady, clear, almost eerily calm. "Talon," she said. "Attack." What happened next was chaos. The dog, Talon, exploded into motion with a speed and precision that made Don Vero's combat-trained mind scream professional. This wasn't a stray defending its territory. This was a weapon. Talon went low, hitting the nearest assassin at knee level and taking him down hard. Before the man even hit the ground, the dog was on his gun hand, jaws clamping down with bone-crushing force. The man screamed. The gun clattered away. "Shoot it!" Vic yelled, raising his weapon. But Talon was already moving. The dog weaved between the men with impossible agility, staying low, using their own bodies as shields. When Jimmy fired, the bullet went wide, hitting Carlos in the shoulder instead. Carlos went down cursing. 3 seconds. 3 men down. 7 to go. And that's when the girl moved. While every eye was on the dog, she darted toward Don Vero with the kind of speed that came from years of running from danger. She grabbed his arm, surprisingly strong for someone so small. "Can you walk?" she demanded. Don Vero stared at her, his mind struggling to process what was happening. "Who are you?" "Someone who needs you alive." She pulled harder. "Move." Training overrode shock. Don Vero pushed himself up, biting back a groan as pain lanced through his side. The girl was already pulling him toward a section of wall covered in layers of graffiti, tags upon tags creating a chaotic rainbow of spray paint. Behind them, Talon was still wreaking havoc. 4 men now stumbling, bleeding, disarmed. The remaining ones backing up, firing wildly, hitting nothing but brick and rain. The girl reached the wall and did something Don Vero would have never noticed. She kicked a specific brick near the bottom. Once, twice. On the 3rd kick, a section of the wall, actually a cleverly disguised board, swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. "Tunnel. In," she commanded. And Don Vero found himself obeying this 8-year-old like she was a commanding officer. Behind them, Vic screamed, "Don't let them escape." The girl put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled. Sharp, high, specific pattern. Instantly, Talon broke off his attack. 2 more men went down as the dog bounded toward them, a streak of wet fur and violence. The dog hit the tunnel entrance at full speed, disappearing into the darkness. The girl followed, pulling Don Vero with her. The last thing he heard before the darkness swallowed them was Vic screaming into his phone, voice high and panicked. "He escaped. A kid and a dog. I know how it sounds, just find them." Then the board swung shut behind them and the world went black. The darkness was absolute, complete, the kind of darkness that made you question if your eyes were even open. Don Vero stumbled, his hand reaching out for something, anything, to orient himself. His wound screamed with every movement. "Don't pass out." The girl's voice came from ahead of him, matter of fact. "I can't carry you." "Who?" Don Vero's voice cracked. He swallowed, tried again. "You know who I am?" "Everyone knows the lion." Her hand found his in the darkness, small fingers wrapping around his tattooed knuckles with surprising firmness. "Now shut up and follow, and try not to bleed too much. The smell attracts rats." She pulled him forward into the pitch black, her movements confident, assured. She knew these tunnels, knew them the way you only knew a place you'd lived in, survived in. Behind them, Don Vero could hear Talon's claws clicking on concrete, taking up rear guard position like a trained soldier. They walked, or rather, stumbled in Don Vero's case, through what felt like miles of darkness. The air was thick, humid, smelling of mold and old water and decades of decay. Sometimes the tunnel was wide enough that Don Vero could stretch his arms out and not touch walls. Other times it narrowed so much he had to turn sideways, feeling the rough concrete scrape against his shoulders. The girl never hesitated, never paused. Her hand in his was steady, pulling him forward with absolute certainty. She navigated by touch and memory, occasionally calling out quiet warnings. "Step up. There's a ledge. Duck. Low ceiling here. Careful. Water. It's deep." The pain in Don Vero's side was intensifying, a hot, throbbing agony that made his vision swim. Except his vision was already useless in this darkness. His legs felt heavy. His breathing was labored. "You know who I am," he said again, needing to understand, needing to know why a child would save him. "Everyone knows the lion," she repeated. "The tattoo on your neck, the scar above your left eye, the way you walk like you own every room you enter. You're Don Vero. You've run this city for 20 years. Then why?" I said shut up and follow. They passed through what Don Vero's educated guess said was old subway infrastructure. The tunnels had that specific shape, that engineered precision that spoke of city planning from decades ago. He could hear water dripping, the occasional scratch and scurry of rats, and once, something that sounded like voices in the distance. "People live down here?" he asked. "Lots of people," the girl said. "The city above forgot about the city below. We remember each other, though. We know when to see and when to look away." She didn't answer. 20 minutes into the walk, though it felt like hours, Don Vero's legs gave out. He stumbled, his hands slipping from the girl's grip, his shoulder hitting the tunnel wall. He slid down, unable to stop himself, the pain in his side exploding into white-hot agony. "Hey!" The girl's voice was sharp with alarm. "No, not yet. We're almost there." "Can't," Don Vero gasped. "Need to. Just need a minute." "We don't have a minute. Dante's men know these tunnels too. Not all of them, but enough." Her small hands found his face in the darkness, surprisingly gentle. "Listen to me. You're Don Vero, the lion. You've survived wars. You've survived the FBI. You've survived 30 years in hell. You're not dying in a tunnel because you're too stubborn to walk another 5 minutes. Despite everything, the pain, the blood loss, the absolute insanity of the situation." Don Vero almost laughed. This tiny girl was giving him a pep talk. And it was working. 5 minutes, he managed. Maybe 10. But who's counting? She helped him up, surprisingly strong, and Talon pressed against his other side, providing support. Together, the three of them continued into the darkness. When the light finally appeared ahead, Don Vero thought he might be hallucinating. But as they got closer, he realized it was real. Dim, orange, flickering, the light of a camping lantern. They emerged into what had once been a subway platform. Ancient, forgotten, probably dating back to the early 1900s. The tracks were long gone, filled in with debris and time. But the platform itself remained, a space about 30 feet long and 15 feet wide, tucked away in the city's forgotten underbelly. And someone had made it a home. There was a mattress, old but relatively clean, with a pile of blankets. A stack of milk crates serving as shelves, filled with canned goods, bottled water, books. A camping stove. A first aid kit that looked well used. A calendar on the wall where someone had been marking off days with careful X's. "Welcome to my place," the girl said, finally releasing his hand. "It's not much, but the rent's good." Don Vero collapsed onto the mattress, his vision swimming. The girl was already moving with practiced efficiency, pulling supplies from various crates. She had medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic, even what looked like surgical thread. "How long have you lived here?" Don Vero asked, watching her work. "Long enough." She knelt beside him, her small hands surprisingly gentle as she began cutting away his ruined shirt. "This is going to hurt." It did. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic that burned like fire, her movements careful and competent. Don Vero bit back groans, watching this child work with the skill of someone who'd done this before. "It went through," she announced, probing the exit wound on his back. "You're lucky. Another inch left and it would have hit something important. I've seen worse." "How old are you?" The question came out before Don Vero could stop it. 8. Almost 9. She was threading a needle now, her small face scrunched in concentration. "This next part's really going to hurt. Talon, hold." The dog moved to Don Vero's other side, and before he could ask what she meant, the animal placed a heavy paw on his chest. Not aggressive, just firm, keeping him still. "Wait, you're not going to." The first stitch made him curse. The second made him see stars. By the fifth, his vision was graying at the edges. A child. An 8-year-old child was stitching his gunshot wound in an abandoned subway tunnel, and somehow her hands were steadier than half the field medics he'd known. "Where did you learn this?" he gasped between stitches. "Books. YouTube videos before my phone died. Trial and error." She pulled another stitch tight. "You learn or you die. Streets aren't nice." 10 stitches total, front and back. By the time she was done, Don Vero's face was slick with sweat and his whole body was trembling. She wrapped him in clean bandages, probably stolen from some pharmacy, with the efficiency of a professional. "Rest," she commanded, standing up. "You've lost blood." Sleep helps. Who are you? Don Vero asked again, but his vision was already fading, exhaustion and blood loss pulling him under. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the girl and her dog, sitting by the lantern, her small hand buried in Talon's fur. They looked like they'd been doing this for a long time, surviving together, protecting each other. Just before unconsciousness claimed him, one thought cut through the haze. What kind of life had this child lived that she could stitch gunshot wounds and navigate miles of pitch-black tunnels and command a dog like a military asset? And why, out of everyone in New York, had she chosen to save him? The dreams were fragmented, violent. Marco's face, the look of betrayal in his best friend's eyes, the gunshot, the blood, the way Marco had fallen. And then Dante's voice, cold and satisfied. It had to be done, brother. He was selling us out. Don Vero woke with a gasp, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Pain lanced through his side, reminding him exactly where he was and what had happened. The camping lantern was still burning, turned down low, casting long shadows across the underground platform. The smell of instant ramen filled the small space. The girl was sitting cross-legged on the floor near the camping stove, carefully pouring boiling water into 2 foam cups. Talon lay beside her, his massive head on his paws, amber eyes tracking Don Vero's every movement. "You're awake," she said without looking up. "Good. You've been out for 12 hours. I was starting to worry." Don Vero tried to sit up, groaned, gave up halfway. His mouth tasted like old copper and his body felt like it had been used as a punching bag. "What time is it? Does it matter down here?" She brought over one of the ramen cups, steam curling from the surface. "Drink. You need fluids." He took the cup with shaking hands, surprised by how hungry he was. The ramen was cheap, probably dollar store quality, but it tasted better than anything he'd had in months. Have you ever noticed how the worst moments make the simplest things feel sacred? Drop a comment if you've ever experienced that turning point. As he ate, Don Vero studied his surroundings more carefully. The walls were covered in photographs, printed photos, not just phone pictures. Old school. The girl with an older couple, clearly parents, all of them smiling at a kitchen table. The girl, younger, maybe 3 or 4, being held by a woman with kind eyes. A man in a nice suit, laughing at something off camera. Family. This child had a family once. There were books too. Lots of them. Stolen from libraries probably, given the barcodes and stamps. But the titles surprised him. Advanced reading. Philosophy. History. Medical textbooks. Books about survival, about architecture, about the history of New York subway system. And there was a calendar on the wall. Today's date had a fresh X through it. But when Don Vero counted backward, tracking the X's, his stomach dropped. 5 years. This child had been marking days for 5 years. "Why did you save me?" he asked again, needing to understand. The girl was feeding scraps of her own ramen to Talon, talking to the dog in a soft voice like he could understand every word. Maybe he could. The animal certainly acted like he understood. "Talon chose you," she said finally, still not meeting his eyes. "The dog chose me?" He's never wrong about people. Now she did look at him, those dark eyes intense and old beyond their years. "He wanted to save you, so I did." "That's insane." "Maybe," she shrugged. "But Talon's kept me alive for 5 years. I trust his judgment more than I trust most humans." Don Vero wanted to argue, wanted to demand real answers, but he was too weak and she was too stubborn. Instead, he noticed something else. She'd given him most of the ramen. Her cup was barely half full. She was literally feeding a mafia boss who could buy a restaurant with his pocket change, while she survived on scraps. "Take mine," he said, offering the cup back. "You need it more. You lost blood. You need calories." She turned away, dismissing the argument. "Besides, I've had breakfast." "You call that breakfast?" "I call it survival." The silver locket around her neck caught the lantern light as she moved. Tarnished, old, but clearly precious to her. She touched it absently, the way people touched Lucky Charms or religious medals. Whatever was in there mattered to her more than anything. Where are your parents? Don Vero asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. Gone. Gone where? Gone. She stood up abruptly, her small face closing off. You can stay until you're strong enough to walk. Then you need to leave. It's not safe for either of us if you stay too long. The men who ambushed me will keep looking, but they don't know these tunnels like I do. You're safe for now. She moved to a small section of the platform where she'd set up what looked like a reading corner. Blankets arranged just so. A flashlight with a dimming battery. And books. So many books. She curled up with one, Talon immediately moving to lie beside her. And just like that, Don Vero was dismissed. He watched her read. This impossible child who lived in darkness and stitched gunshot wounds and commanded war dogs. She was young enough that she should have been worried about homework and friends and whatever 8-year-olds worried about. Instead, she was reading a book about urban survival techniques, her lips moving slightly as she absorbed information that might keep her alive another day. What happened to you? Don Vero thought but didn't ask. He'd seen enough trauma in his life to recognize it in others. This girl had survived something catastrophic. And whatever it was, it had left her alone down here with nothing but a dog and her wits and an iron determination not to die. He finished the ramen, feeling strength slowly returning to his limbs. The stitches pulled when he moved, but the girl had done good work. Professional work. He'd had mob doctors do worse. Sleep pulled at him again, his body demanding rest to heal. Before he gave in, he asked one more question. What's your name? For a long moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. Mila. Mila, he repeated. I know who you are. She still didn't look up from her book. Everyone knows the lion. But as Don Vero drifted back to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that when she said, I know who you are, she meant something deeper than just his reputation. She knew him, somehow, from somewhere, and that was more terrifying than 10 guns pointed at his head. The next 2 days passed in a strange, surreal rhythm. Don Vero slept, woke, ate whatever meager supplies Mila shared, and watched this child navigate a life that no child should have to live. She left twice a day, once in what she called morning, though time had no meaning underground, and once in evening. She'd return with supplies, food, water, sometimes clothes or books or other necessities. Where do you get this stuff? He asked on the second day, watching her unpack stolen granola bars and bottled water. Stores. You steal it. She gave him a look that said the question was stupid. You think they're going to sell to an 8-year-old with no money? Fair point. She was teaching him the tunnels, showing him the routes, the safe passages, the dead ends to avoid. Her knowledge was encyclopedic. She knew which tunnels connected to which, where the homeless camps were, where to avoid because of structural instability or rats or worse things. How did you learn all this? Don Vero asked as she led him through a passage she called the spine. Trial and error. Got lost a lot at first. Took me months to map it all out. She pointed to a junction ahead. Left goes to the old Red Line platform. Right goes toward the river. Straight goes deeper, toward the really old infrastructure from the 1800s. I don't go there. It's not stable. She was brilliant. That's what struck him most. This child, living in darkness and poverty, had not just survived but thrived. She taught herself navigation, medicine, urban survival. She trained or been trained by a dog that moved like a military asset. She read books that would challenge most adults. And she'd chosen to save him. Why? On the third day, he caught her staring at his neck. At the lion tattoo. Her dark eyes were intense, focused, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. I've seen that before, she said finally. Don Vero's hand instinctively went to his neck. The lion had been Marco's idea. Brothers in arms. Partners in building an empire. Marco had gotten a matching tattoo, though his had been on his shoulder. Private thing. A bond between them. Where? Don Vero asked, his voice carefully neutral. Mila looked away, her small face closing off the way it always did when questions got too personal. Doesn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered a lot. That night, or what passed for night in the eternal darkness of the tunnels, Don Vero woke to the sound of crying. Soft, muffled, the kind of crying someone did when they were trying desperately not to be heard. Mila was curled up in her blankets, her small body shaking. Talon had his massive head on her chest, whining softly, trying to comfort her. She was calling for someone in her sleep, the word broken and desperate. "Papa! Papa! Please!" Don Vero didn't know how to comfort crying children. That skill had never been necessary in his world. He started to turn away to give her privacy, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the debt he owed her. Maybe it was the way she sounded so utterly broken. Maybe it was just that after 48 hours of watching this child survive alone, he couldn't stand to hear her cry. He made his way to her corner, moving slowly, his wound still healing, and knelt down. Talon looked up at him, those amber eyes assessing, then seemed to nod in some canine way, giving permission. "Mila," Don Vero said gently, touching her shoulder. "Hey, wake up. You're dreaming." She jerked awake with a gasp, eyes wide and terrified in the lantern light. For a moment, she looked like what she was, a terrified 8-year-old having a nightmare. Then her walls slammed back into place, her face going carefully blank. "I'm fine," she said, wiping at her eyes roughly. "You were crying. I'm fine." "Mila," I said, "I'm fine." She sat up, pulling away from his hand. But she was still shaking, still scared. Don Vero sat back, giving her space. "Bad dream." She didn't answer, just buried her face in Talon's fur, breathing hard. The dog rumbled softly, a comforting sound, and slowly her shaking eased. Don Vero got water, brought it to her. "Here." She took it with hands that still trembled slightly, drank deeply. Some of her color returned. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. "No. Sometimes it helps. Not this." She set the water down, pulled her knees to her chest. "Nothing helps this." The lantern light caught the silver locket around her neck, making it gleam. Without thinking, Don Vero reached out. "What's in there?" Mila's hand shot to the locket, protective, possessive. "Nothing. Doesn't look like nothing." For a long moment they sat in silence. Then, slowly, reluctantly, Mila's fingers found the clasp. She opened the locket with the careful reverence of someone handling something sacred. Inside was a photograph, old, worn but still clear. A man in an expensive suit, smiling at the camera, holding a baby girl. Both of them looked happy. The man looked proud. The baby looked loved. Don Vero's world stopped. He knew that face, knew it better than his own, had seen it laughing, scheming, bleeding, had seen the light go out of those eyes 5 years ago in a warehouse in Queens, after Don Vero had put a bullet in his best friend's chest. Marco the Saint Rossi, his former underboss, his brother in everything but blood, the man he'd killed for betraying the family, the man whose death still haunted his dreams 5 years later. And the baby in the photo. Don Vero's hands were shaking as he looked at Mila, really looked at her. The dark eyes, the stubborn chin, the intelligence that went bone deep. Features he should have recognized sooner because he'd seen them every day for 15 years in Marco's face. "Where did you get this?" His voice came out strangled. Mila was watching him carefully, seeing his reaction. "It's my papa. He gave it to me before he went away." The baby was Mila, Marco's daughter. Marco had a daughter and Don Vero had never known. Or had he known and forgotten? No. Marco had kept his family separate, protected, away from the business. Hardly anyone had known he was even married, let alone had a child. Don Vero was being protected by, indebted to, the daughter of the man he'd murdered. "This man," Don Vero managed, his throat tight. "What's his name?" "Marco Rossi." Mila touched the photo gently. "Did you know him?" The simple innocence of that question was a knife in Don Vero's heart. She didn't know. She didn't know that the man she'd saved had killed her father. Or maybe she did know her father was dead, but didn't know who'd done it. "Yes," Don Vero whispered. "I knew Marco." Mila's whole face changed, lit up. hope flooding those dark eyes in a way that made Don Vero want to die. Is he alive? Do you know where he is? Papa said he had to go away for work, but he'd come back, and I've been waiting and waiting, but... Mila, it's been 5 years, and I don't know where to look, and if you know him, maybe you know where he went, and... Mila, stop. She stopped, looked at him, read something in his face that made her own face crumble. He's not coming back, she whispered. Is he? Don Vero couldn't speak, couldn't make his throat work. The guilt was choking him. When? Her voice was small, broken. When did he die? 5 years ago. Mila nodded slowly, like she'd always known but needed someone to confirm it. How? Tell her, Don Vero thought. Tell her the truth. That you're the monster who killed her father. That you're the reason she's been living in these tunnels alone. That every day of her suffering is because of you. But before he could answer, Talon suddenly lifted his head, ears forward, a low growl building in his chest. Mila was on her feet instantly, all grief pushed aside, survival mode engaged. They found us. From deep in the tunnels, Don Vero heard it. Voices, multiple voices, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Getting closer. Dante's men had found the underground, and Don Vero's debt to Marco's daughter had just gotten a lot more complicated. Move. Now. Mila was already grabbing her backpack, her movements practiced and efficient. She whistled once, sharp and commanding, and Talon was at her side instantly, the growl still rumbling in his chest. Don Vero struggled to his feet, pain shooting through his side. How many exits? 3. But if they found the main entrance, they probably have the others watched. She was extinguishing the camping lantern, plunging them into darkness. There's a maintenance shaft. Tight squeeze. Can you make it? He didn't have a choice. The voices were getting closer, flashlight beams beginning to strobe through the distant tunnels. Don Vero grabbed what little supplies he could reach in the dark, following the sound of Mila's footsteps. They moved through the blackness, Talon leading, his paws silent on the concrete. Mila's hand found Don Vero's again, pulling him forward, guiding him around obstacles he couldn't see. Behind them, the voices grew louder. Somewhere down here, I'm telling you. Probably dead already. Dante wants proof. The maintenance shaft was exactly what Mila had promised. A tight squeeze. She went first, her small body disappearing into what felt like a vertical coffin. Talon followed with surprising agility for a dog his size. Don Vero had to exhale completely to fit, his wounded side screaming protest as the concrete scraped his shoulders. They climbed in darkness, Mila's quiet instructions the only guide. Left hand, there's a grip. Right foot, step up. Don't put weight on the center rung. It's loose. The climb felt endless. Don Vero's arms shook with exhaustion, his wound bleeding again, soaking through the bandages. But Mila kept moving, kept climbing, and he refused to be the one who gave up. Finally, they emerged into a different section of tunnel. Wider, older. The air smelled different here, more decay, less water. Mila led them through a series of turns that would have been impossible to memorize, finally stopping in what felt like a small alcove. They won't find us here, she whispered. This section isn't on any maps. It's from before the city kept records. Don Vero slid down the wall, breathing hard. His side was on fire. He could feel blood, warm and sticky, under his shirt. Mila's stitches had torn. She knew without being told. Her small hands found the wound in the darkness, assessing the damage. You're bleeding again. I've had worse. You keep saying that. Her voice was tight with something. Anger? Fear? But you keep bleeding anyway. Mila, just stop. She moved away from him, her voice cracking. Stop pretending you're invincible. Stop pretending none of this matters. My papa trusted you and you killed him. I saved you and now we're being hunted. Talon's trying to protect us both, and everyone we care about ends up dead or bleeding or... Her voice broke completely. In the darkness, Don Vero heard her crying. Not the muffled crying from her nightmare. This was raw, desperate, the sound of 5 years of survival finally breaking under the weight of everything she'd been carrying. Don Vero didn't know how to comfort children, but he knew what it felt like to carry impossible weight alone. He moved through the darkness until he found her, small and shaking, and did the only thing he could think of. He held her. Mila fought it at first, her small fists pushing against his chest. But then she collapsed into him, sobbing into his ruined shirt, and Don Vero held Marco's daughter while she cried for everything she'd lost. Talon pressed against them both, a warm, solid presence in the darkness. And for a long time, that's how they stayed, 3 broken creatures holding each other in the forgotten depths of the city, while above them the hunt continued. When Mila finally pulled away, her voice was hoarse but steadier. "We need to keep moving. They'll search the whole network eventually. Where can we go? There's a place. Above ground. Someone who might help." She paused. "But first, there's something Papa wanted me to give you, if anything ever happened to him." In the darkness, Don Vero heard her unzipping her backpack, rummaging through contents. Then her hand found his, pressing something small and plastic-wrapped into his palm. "He said it was important, that if he died, I needed to find you and give you this. He said you'd know what to do with it." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He said, find Vero. Never trust Dante." Don Vero's hands shook as he held the object. Even through the plastic wrapping, he could tell what it was. A USB drive. "He said Dante's name?" Don Vero's voice came out strangled. "Your father specifically said not to trust my brother?" "Yes." Mila's voice was quiet in the darkness. "Those were his last words to me. Hide, baby. Don't come out. Find Vero. He'll be angry, but he has honor. Never trust Dante." The words hit Don Vero like physical blows. Marco had known. Even facing death, even knowing Don Vero would be the one to kill him, Marco had trusted him over Dante, had tried to warn him. "How long have you been carrying this?" Don Vero asked. 5 years. Since I was 3. I didn't know what it was. I just kept it safe, like he asked. 5 years. This child had been carrying proof of something for 5 years, keeping a promise to a dead father, waiting for the chance to fulfill his last wish. "We need a computer," Don Vero said, his mind already racing. "Somewhere we can see what's on this." "I know a place." Mila stood, her hand finding his in the darkness. "But we have to go now, before they expand the search grid." They moved through the tunnels with Mila leading, Talon guarding the rear, and Don Vero in the middle, clutching the USB drive like it was salvation. Which he was beginning to realize it might be. The internet cafe was in Chinatown, tucked between a dumpling shop and a shop selling knockoff designer bags. The sign above the door was in Mandarin and English, 24-hour internet access. No questions asked. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of instant noodles. Rows of computer stations lined the walls, most occupied by people who looked like they wanted to be invisible. Gamers. Immigrants calling family overseas. People doing things they didn't want traced. The owner sat behind a scarred desk near the door, an old Russian man with prison tattoos on his knuckles and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He looked at Don Vero's blood-soaked clothes, at the child with the fierce eyes, at the scarred dog, and said nothing. $20. Station 7. 1 hour. His accent was thick, his expression bored. Don Vero paid with money Mila had stolen earlier. The Russian took it without comment, already looking away, already forgetting they existed. Station 7 was in the back corner, partially shielded by a divider. Private enough. Don Vero sat down, his hands shaking as he unwrapped the USB drive and plugged it in. Mila stood beside him, Talon at her feet, all 3 of them staring at the screen as the files loaded. There were dozens of files. Financial records, spreadsheets tracking money moving through shell corporations, recorded phone conversations, photographs, and one video file, marked simply, "If you're watching this, I'm dead." Don Vero started with the financial records. His trained eye saw the pattern immediately. Money being siphoned from the organization's accounts. Small amounts at first, almost unnoticeable. Then larger, systematic, professional. The digital trail led through 3 shell corporations, all eventually ending at accounts in the Cayman Islands. Accounts controlled by Dante. The phone recordings were damning. Dante's voice? Smooth and confident. Bribing a police captain to falsify reports that Marco was working with the FBI. Dante meeting with the Castellano family, promising them territory once the old man was out of the picture. Dante laughing as he described framing Marco, making it look like betrayal. He was getting too close, Dante's recorded voice said. Marco figured out the embezzling. Was gonna bring it to Vero. Had to be dealt with. Blood or not, business is business. Don Vero's vision was blurring. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely control the mouse. Marco hadn't betrayed him. Marco had been trying to save him. And Don Vero had killed him for it. When someone you trust betrays you, it destroys you. But when you realize you destroyed someone who was trying to save you, that's a different kind of death. If the story is hitting you deep, hit that like button. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone in understanding that kind of pain. There's one more file, Mila said quietly, pointing at the screen. The video. Don Vero didn't want to watch it. Didn't want to see Marco's face, hear his voice, face the ghost of the man he'd murdered. But Mila deserved to see her father one more time. And Don Vero deserved whatever torture this video would deliver. He clicked it open. Marco's face filled the screen. He looked exhausted, terrified, but determined. He was in what looked like a hotel room, sitting on the edge of a bed, recording on a laptop camera. Behind him, Don Vero could see a small suitcase. Marco had been packing to run. Vero, Marco's recorded voice began, and Don Vero flinched like he'd been struck. If you're watching this, I'm probably dead, and you probably killed me. Beside him, Mila made a small sound. Don Vero wanted to turn it off, to spare her this, but she shook her head. I need to see him, she whispered. Please. Marco continued speaking, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Dante has poisoned your mind against me. I don't blame you for believing him. He's your blood, your brother. Of course you'd trust him over me. But Vero, brother, I've never betrayed you. Not once in 15 years. Everything I've done has been to protect what we built together. Marco's hands moved, shuffling papers just off camera. I found the evidence. The embezzling, the side deals, the plans to take over. It's all on this drive. Financial records, recordings, everything you need to know the truth. Dante's been bleeding the organization dry for years. When I confronted him about it, when I told him I was bringing it to you, he knew what I'd do, and he got ahead of it. Fabricated evidence that I was working with the feds. Made it look like I was the traitor. Marco's voice cracked slightly. By the time you watch this, he'll have convinced you I'm the enemy. And you'll have done what you always do, protected the family. Eliminated the threat. I understand, Vero. I really do. You're a man of action. Dante knows that. He weaponized it against both of us. A long pause. Marco rubbed his face, and Don Vero could see tears on his best friend's cheeks. If I'm gone, Marco continued, voice thick with emotion, please, protect my family, protect Mila and Maria. They don't know anything about the business. They're innocent. Don't let Dante hurt them. Promise me, Vero, whatever else happens, whatever you think of me, promise me you'll keep them safe. Marco looked directly into the camera, and it felt like he was looking into Don Vero's soul. And Vero, don't let guilt destroy you. I know you. I know how you carry things. What's done is done. You can't change it. But you can do better. Be better. For all of us. For Mila. For everyone who's counting on you to be more than just the lion. Marco smiled then, sad and tired and full of a forgiveness Don Vero didn't deserve. You're my brother, Vero. Blood doesn't make family. Loyalty does. Love does. And I've loved you like a brother since the day we met. Whatever happens, know that. Protect my daughter. And try to forgive yourself. The video ended. Don Vero was crying. A man who'd spent 30 years building an empire on strength and fear, sobbing in a dingy internet cafe while an 8-year-old girl watched. His whole body shook with the force of it, decades of suppressed emotion breaking through every wall he'd built. Marco had forgiven him. Even knowing Don Vero would kill him, Marco had recorded a message of forgiveness and hope and love. And Don Vero had murdered him anyway. Mila was crying too, silent tears streaming down her face as she watched the screen even though the video had ended. "That was the last time I heard his voice," she whispered. 5 years, and I forgot what he sounded like. But now. Don Vero pulled her close, both of them crying for Marco, for Maria, for 5 years of a childhood stolen by Dante's betrayal and Don Vero's blind trust. "He still loved you," Mila said softly, her face pressed against Don Vero's shoulder. "Even knowing you'd kill him, he still called you brother." "I don't deserve that." Don Vero's voice was raw, broken. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I killed the best man I ever knew because I was too stupid to see the truth." "No." Mila pulled back, looking up at him with those fierce dark eyes. "You were tricked. By Dante. By someone who knew exactly how to make you hurt the people you loved. That's not the same as choosing to hurt them." "I still pulled the trigger." "Yes." She didn't flinch from the truth. "You did. And nothing changes that. But Papa knew. He knew and he still forgave you. Still believed in you. Still thought you could be better." Her small hand found his. "Are you going to prove him right? Or are you going to let Dante win by drowning in guilt?" 8 years old. This child was 8 years old, and she was giving Don Vero lessons in forgiveness and purpose that grown men couldn't grasp. "What do you want me to do?" Don Vero asked, meaning it completely. "Tell me what you want. What you need." Mila was quiet for a long moment, her hand still in his, Talon's head resting on her knee. When she spoke, her voice was small but certain. "I want to stop being alone. I want to stop being scared every time I close my eyes. I want." She swallowed hard. "I want someone to keep me safe. The way Papa used to. The way Talon tries to, but he's just a dog and he can't buy food or sign school papers or—" Her voice broke. "I want someone to be my family again." Don Vero's heart shattered and reformed in the same moment. "Mila, I killed your father. I know. I'm the reason you've been living in tunnels. I know. You should hate me. I do." She looked up at him, tears still on her face. "But I also know what Papa said. Find Vero. Never trust Dante. Even dying, he trusted you more than his own brother-in-law." "Why?" "I don't know. Because he knew you could do better. Be better." Mila's grip on his hand tightened. "Can you?" The question hung between them. Could he? Could a man who'd built an empire on violence and fear become someone worth of raising Marco's daughter? Could the lion learn to be something other than a predator? Don Vero thought of Marco's video, of his best friend's forgiveness, of this child who'd saved his life despite every reason to let him die, of a dog who'd protected them both because he remembered love. "Help me destroy Dante," Don Vero said finally. "Help me prove your father right about me. And I swear on Marco's memory, you'll never be alone again. Never be scared. I'll keep you safe. You killed my papa. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right." Mila studied his face for a long moment. Then, slowly, she extended her small hand. "Deal. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Papa. To finish what he started." Don Vero took her hand, shaking it with the same seriousness he'd use for any business arrangement. Because that's what this was, a contract. Promise. A new beginning built on the ashes of the old. Talon, as if understanding what had just happened, placed his massive paw on their joined hands. The Trinity was formed. The broken Mafia boss, the orphan child, and the loyal dog, united by loss, bound by purpose, fighting for the memory of a good man destroyed by lies. Outside the cafe, sitting on the curb while Talon explored nearby trash cans, they made their plans. Don Vero had his phone, miraculously still working despite everything. He pulled up a number he hadn't called in months. Sal the Bull Romano, his oldest captain. The only man besides Marco he'd ever fully trusted. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah, Sal. It's me." Silence. Then, disbelieving, "Boss? Jesus Christ," we thought. "Everyone's saying you're dead. Dante wishes I was dead. But I'm very much alive." Don Vero watched Mila feed scraps of stolen bread to some pigeons. "And I'm coming for him. What do you need?" "Gather the loyalists. Men who served under Marco. Men who never believed he was a traitor. There aren't many left. Dante's been cleaning house. Whoever's left. Red Hook Warehouse. 2 hours." "Boss, are you sure you're—" "2 hours, Sal." He hung up, looked at Mila. "You ready for this?" She looked up at him, a pigeon eating from her hand, Talon sitting protectively at her side. "Are you?" "Fair question." The warehouse in Red Hook smelled of salt water and old fish. Empty except for the 5 men who'd answered Don Vero's call. Sal Romano, built like a brick wall and just as solid. Tony the Snake Marchetti, thin and dangerous. Big Pete Calabrese, whose nickname was accurate. Carlos Martinez, the only one brave enough to work with the Colombian cartels. And Jimmy the Fuse O'Brien, who got his nickname from his temper. Men who'd known Marco, who'd worked with him, who'd never believed the story about him being a traitor. They stared in shock as Don Vero walked in flanked by a child and a dog. "Boss," Sal said carefully, his eyes on Mila. What's going on?" Don Vero stood in the center of the warehouse, Mila beside him, Talon at her feet. "Gentlemen, meet Mila Rossi, Marco's daughter." The silence was deafening. "Marco had a kid?" Sal's voice was hoarse. "She's been surviving alone since she was 3, Don Vero said, each word costing him. "Because I killed her father based on Dante's lies." The men shifted uncomfortably. They knew the story. Everyone did. Marco the traitor. The execution. The family dissolved. "It was all fabricated," Don Vero continued. "Marco was innocent. He discovered that Dante had been embezzling from the organization. Was going to expose him. So Dante framed him, made it look like betrayal, and used me as the weapon to eliminate the threat. He pulled out the USB drive. Marco recorded everything. Financial records. Recordings of Dante bribing cops, making side deals, planning the takeover. It's all here. Every bit of proof we need that my brother is the real traitor." Don Vero plugged the USB into a laptop Sal provided. Played the recordings. Showed the financial records. Let Marco's video testimony speak for itself. By the time the evidence finished, all 5 men were visibly shaking with rage. "He killed Marco?" Tony's voice was deadly quiet. "Dante had us kill Marco? And my mother?" Mila added, her small voice cutting through the warehouse. "He cut her brake lines. Made it look like an accident." The men looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Saw the 2 old eyes, the street-smart wariness, the scars on her hands from 5 years of survival. "She's been living in the subway tunnels," Don Vero said. "Alone. Teaching herself to survive. Because we failed her. Because I believed a lie and killed the man who was trying to protect us all. We fix this," Sal said, his voice hard. "We go in. We take Dante out. We make him pay for Marco." "Yes," Don Vero agreed. "But we do it smart. Dante's had months to consolidate power, to replace our loyalists with his men. He's fortified. We hit him where he feels safest." "The penthouse," Tony said. "The penthouse." They planned for hours. Entry points. Exit routes. Dante's security rotations. Weapon loadouts. Contingencies for when things inevitably went wrong. And through it all, Mila surprised them by contributing. "Dante's men change shifts at 8 p.m., she said quietly. "That's when they're most distracted. Focused on handoff protocols instead of watching for threats." 5 hardened criminals turned to stare at an 8-year-old. "How do you know that?" Sal asked. "I've been watching them. For 3 years. Ever since I figured out who killed Papa." Mila pulled out a notebook from her backpack. Pages filled with observations, patterns, schedules. "I couldn't do anything about it. I was just a kid. But I watched, learned, waited. For 3 years, this child had been conducting surveillance on the man who'd destroyed her family. Not for revenge. For information. For the day when she could use it. "You're Marco's daughter, all right?" Sal said softly. He'd be proud. Mila's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Then let's finish what he started." The plan was formed. They'd hit Dante's penthouse tomorrow night. 8 men total: Don Vero, Sal, Tony, Big Pete, Carlos, and Jimmy, plus 2 others they'd recruited. Fast and surgical. In and out before Dante could call for reinforcements. "What about the kid?" Tony asked, nodding at Mila. "She stays with Sal in the command vehicle," Don Vero said firmly. "No." Mila's voice was sharp. "I'm coming." "Absolutely not. My father died because of Dante's lies. My mother was murdered. I spent 5 years preparing for this. I'm coming." "You're 8 years old." "I know. I've been 8 for most of this." She looked him directly in the eye. "Papa died because of lies. I'm going to watch the truth win. You don't get to stop me." Don Vero recognized that stubborn set to her jaw. Had seen it in Marco's face 1,000 times. When Marco made up his mind about something, nothing short of death could change it. His daughter had inherited that quality. "Command vehicle," Don Vero compromised. "You stay with Sal and Talon. You monitor. You watch. But you don't go in." Mila considered this. "Fine. But if things go wrong, I'm not staying behind." "If things go wrong, you run." "No promises." "Fair enough." The next evening, Don Vero stood in a safe house bathroom, looking at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was familiar but different. Still the same tattooed hands, the same lion on his neck, the same scars and hard eyes. But something had shifted. Something fundamental. There was a knock on the door. Mila's voice. "I have something for you." He opened the door. She was holding a small vest, child-sized body armor. Top of the line. Expensive. "Where did you get this?" Don Vero asked. "You ordered it 3 days ago. It came today." She looked up at him. "You knew I'd insist on coming. So you made sure I'd be safe." Don Vero hadn't realized he was going to do it until he'd placed the order. But yes, he'd known. This child was too much like her father to be left behind. "Marco would never forgive me if you got hurt," he said gruffly, helping her into the vest. "Marco would understand that I need to be there." She fastened the straps. "He always said the hardest part of being a parent was letting your kids face danger when you'd rather lock them away forever." "He said that?" "Yeah. When I asked why he had to go to work when it was dangerous. He said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you're terrified." Don Vero checked the vest's fit, making sure it wouldn't impede her movement. "You're sure about this?" "Are you?" They looked at each other. The girl and the man who'd killed her father. United by grief and purpose and the memory of someone they'd both loved. "Let's go finish this," Mila said. Dante's penthouse occupied the entire 40th floor of a luxury building on the Upper East Side. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Marble imported from Italy. Art worth millions. It was a monument to excess and stolen wealth. The service elevator was key. Carlos had bribed a maintenance worker, someone with gambling debts and flexible morals. They'd ride up as a repair crew, bypass the main security, hit Dante before he knew they were there. In the command van parked 2 blocks away, Sal sat at a bank of monitors showing hack security feeds. Mila sat beside him, wearing her vest, one hand buried in Talon's fur. The dog wore a service vest that Sal had made, complete with patches that said, "Service dog, do not pet." "You sure about this, kid?" Sal asked as they watched Don Vero and the others enter the building. "No," Mila said honestly. "But Papa always said being sure was overrated. Being right was what mattered." "Smart man, Marco. The best." On the monitors, they watched Don Vero's team navigate the service areas. Past security checkpoints. Into the elevator. Rising toward the 40th floor. Mila's heart hammered in her chest. She could hear it through the radio. Don Vero's breathing, the shuffle of weapons, the ding as they reached the target floor. The penthouse doors opened. Dante's men were immediately visible, guards stationed at various points. And there, holding court in the center of the obscenely expensive living room, was Dante himself. He looked like Don Vero. Same strong build, same dark eyes. But where Don Vero's face showed the weight of decades of hard decisions, Dante's showed only smug satisfaction. He'd won. Taken the empire. Eliminated threats. Consolidated power. He looked like a king. Don Vero kicked the door open. Dante spun, shock crossing his face. You're supposed to be dead. You'll have to try harder, little brother. Guns came out on both sides. Mexican standoff. 10 men on Dante's side. 8 on Don Vero's. The math wasn't great. I know everything, Don Vero said, voice deadly calm. Marco was innocent. You framed him. You've been embezzling, making side deals, systematically destroying everything we built. Dante's shock melted into a cold smile. Took you long enough. I've been waiting for you to figure it out, wondering how long I could string you along before you saw the truth. You killed my brother. Marco wasn't your brother. I am. Dante's voice rose, anger bleeding through. I'm your actual blood, and you never treated me like it. Always Marco this, Marco that, Marco the saint, Marco the golden boy. What about me, Vero? What about your actual brother? You were always my brother, but you chose to betray that. I chose to take what should have been mine from the start. Dante was pacing now, guns still trained on Don Vero. You and Marco acting like you built this empire. Where was I? Running errands. Following orders. Being the little brother. Well, look who's king now. In the van, Mila was gripping the radio, listening to every word. Sal had one hand on her shoulder, keeping her grounded. On the monitor, Dante was still talking, his anger spilling out. And Marco's wife, Maria, she figured it out too. Saw the financial records. Was going to tell you, so I cut her brake lines. Clean. Simple. One less problem. Mila gasped. Sal's hand tightened on her shoulder. And the best part? Dante laughed, the sound cruel. The little brat survived. Marco's daughter. I've been hunting her for 5 years. One day I'll find her, and the Rossi bloodline ends. No more threats. No more loose ends. Don Vero's voice cut through the radio, hard as steel. You won't touch her. Oh? You know where Marco's spawn is. She's under my protection. Dante laughed harder. You? Protecting Marco's daughter? That's rich. You murdered him. You think his kid would accept anything from you. My greatest mistake, Don Vero said. One I'll spend my life correcting. In the van, Mila made a decision. Sal saw it in her eyes. Kid, no. Don't. But she was already moving, Talon at her heels. Out of the van. Across the street. Into the building. Boss. Sal's voice crackled through the radio. The kid's heading your way. I couldn't stop her. Don Vero's voice, panicked in a way Mila had never heard. No. Mila, stand down. Do not come up here. But Mila was already in the service elevator. Talon pressed against her side. The dog's amber eyes met hers, and she saw understanding there. They'd survived 5 years together. They'd faced this together too. The elevator rose. 40 floors felt like forever and an instant. When the doors opened onto the penthouse level, Mila could hear shouting. Gunfire. The sounds of men trying to kill each other. She pushed through the service door into the main penthouse. Every gun in the room swung toward her. Don Vero's face went white. Mila, no. Dante's eyes widened. Then a slow, terrible smile spread across his face. Well, well, Marco's little brat. Saved me the trouble of hunting you down. Mila walked forward, Talon at her side, every eye on her. She was terrified, but she'd been terrified for 5 years. She'd learned how to walk through fear and come out the other side. I'm Mila Rossi, she said, her voice clear and strong. Daughter of Marco Rossi, the man you murdered through lies. Dante's men looked confused. Don Vero's men looked horrified. This child had just walked into a war zone. So Vero found you, Dante said. How touching. Let me guess, he told you he's sorry? That he wants to make it right? And you believed him? He didn't find me, Mila said, stepping up beside Don Vero. I found him, in an alley, bleeding out, betrayed by you, and I saved his life. You saved the man who killed your father? Dante laughed. You stupid child. My father's last words were never trust Dante. Find Vero. Mila pulled out the locket from under her vest, opened it so everyone could see. Even dying, he knew. He knew you were the real traitor. He trusted Don Vero more than he trusted his own brother-in-law. Why do you think that is? Dante's face twisted with rage. Because Marco was a fool. Just like you. Just like everyone who follows this washed-up has-been. He turned his gun from Don Vero to Mila. But I can fix that. I'll give you a choice, brother. Die fast, or watch me kill Marco's daughter first and then die slow. Don Vero moved faster than Mila had ever seen him move. Stepped directly in front of her, shielding her with his body. You'll have to go through me. Gladly, Dante said, and pulled the trigger. Everything happened in slow motion. Mila saw the gun, saw Dante's finger tighten on the trigger. She saw Don Vero bracing to take the bullet. Saw death coming for the man who'd killed her father, but who'd also promised to keep her safe. Then Talon moved. The dog launched himself with a speed that defied physics. Intercepted the bullet meant for them both. The shot hit him in the chest. He fell, bleeding, his amber eyes finding Mila's as he went down. Talon! Mila's scream cut through the chaos. Then the room exploded. Don Vero charged Dante with the fury of a man who'd lost everything and found purpose in protecting what was left. The brothers collided, gun flying from Dante's hand. They fought with fists and rage and decades of resentment. Around them, the standoff broke. Gunfire erupted. Men fought and fell. Glass shattered. Expensive art destroyed. Blood on marble floors. But Mila saw none of it. She was on her knees beside Talon, her hands pressed to the wound in his chest, feeling his blood pump between her fingers. Stay with me, she sobbed. Please, boy, please stay with me. You promised. You promised you'd keep me safe. You can't leave me. Everyone leaves, but you can't. Not you. Talon's eyes were on her face. His tail thumped once against the floor, weak but deliberate. I see you. I'm here. We're together. Through her tears, Mila saw Don Vero fighting like a man possessed. Every punch was for Marco, for Maria, for 5 years of a child living in darkness, for a loyal dog bleeding out on expensive marble. Dante fought back, younger, faster, fueled by resentment. They crashed through furniture, through glass tables, leaving destruction in their wake. Finally, Don Vero got the upper hand, pinned Dante to the floor, gun to his brother's head. One pull of the trigger and it would all be over. Do it? Dante spat, blood running from his mouth. Prove you're still the monster. Kill your own brother. Don Vero looked at Mila, saw her on the floor, covered in Talon's blood, crying over the dog who'd saved them both. No, Don Vero said. You don't get the easy way out. He pistol-whipped Dante unconscious. Stood, addressed his men, the ones still standing. Strip him of everything, every account, every property, every contact. Take it all. Leave him alive but powerless. Let him live knowing he lost. Then Don Vero ran to Mila and Talon. The dog was barely breathing. The wound was bad, critical. Without immediate help, he wouldn't make it. We're getting him to a vet, Don Vero said, scooping the massive dog into his arms. Now, move. They ran. The strongest bonds aren't formed in comfort. They're forged in crisis, when you fight for each other even when the cost is everything. Hit that subscribe button if you believe some connections are worth protecting at all costs. The emergency veterinary clinic was a blur. Fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic. A surgeon taking one look at Talon's wound and rushing him into surgery. Then nothing to do but wait. Don Vero and Mila sat in the waiting room, both of them covered in blood. Some theirs, most Talon's. Mila hadn't stopped crying. Couldn't stop. He's going to make it, Don Vero said, trying to sound certain. You don't know that. Mila's voice was hollow. He survived 5 years on the streets protecting you. He's tougher than all of us. He took a bullet for me. She looked at her hands, still stained with Talon's blood. Why do people always have to take bullets for me? Don Vero pulled her close. Because you're worth protecting. They sat like that for what felt like hours. At some point, Sal showed up with clean clothes and coffee. Neither of them drank it. Dante? Don Vero asked. Stripped clean. Every account emptied. Every property seized. Every man he turned informed that you're back and he's out. He's got nothing, boss. Just his life. Like you ordered. Good. Mila spoke into Don Vero's chest, her voice muffled. Talon was Papa's dog. Did you know that? Don Vero's arms tightened around her. What? Papa trained him. For protection. After Papa died, after they put Talon in the pound, he escaped. He found me. I don't know how, but he did. He's been protecting me ever since. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. That's why he saved you in the alley. You smell like Papa. They were together for 10 years before Papa died. Talon remembered. He wanted to save you because you were Papa's friend. The revelation hit Don Vero like a physical blow. Marco's dog, the animal that had witnessed Don Vero execute its master, had saved his life. Had protected Marco's daughter. Had brought them together. Marco sent them both. Don Vero whispered. To save me. After everything I did. Marco sent his daughter and his dog to save me. Papa always saw the good in people, Mila said. Even when they couldn't see it themselves. 3 hours later, the surgeon emerged. Exhausted but smiling. He made it. The bullet missed his heart by half an inch. It was close. But he's stable. He'll need months of recovery. But he's going to be fine. Mila collapsed. Don Vero caught her, holding her while she sobbed with relief. And for the first time in 5 years, she reached for him. Clung to him. Let him hold her while she fell apart. Don Vero held Marco's daughter and cried with her. For Talon. For Marco. For Maria. For 5 years of suffering that could have been avoided. And for the impossible second chance they'd all been given. 1 week later, Don Vero's penthouse. Not the one used for business, but the legitimate one he'd bought years ago as an investment. Looked different. A bedroom had been transformed. Pink walls, based on Mila's request. Bookshelves filled with books she'd picked out herself from a real bookstore. A desk for homework. Toys she'd never had as a child. A real room. A real home. Talon wore a recovery vest, moving slowly but steadily improving. He had a massive orthopedic dog bed in Mila's room and another in the living room. Premium dog food. Toys that squeaked. A whole new life. And Mila was learning to be a child again. Slowly. Carefully. With setbacks and nightmares and days when she couldn't remember how to not be on survival mode. But she was trying. Don Vero was learning too. How to cook badly. How to help with homework. How to braid hair, even worse. How to be something other than the lion. Sal found it hilarious. Boss, you went from running a criminal empire to signing permission slips and making packed lunches. If the old crew could see you now. The old crew can shut up, Don Vero said, burning scrambled eggs for the 3rd time that morning. Mila laughed. The first real laugh he'd heard from her. For a crime boss, you're really bad at this. I'm learning. You keep saying that. Because it's true. The empire was changing too. Don Vero systematically closed down the violent operations. The protection rackets. The illegal gambling. The dock hijackings. He kept the legitimate businesses, the real estate, the investments that were actually legal. And he created something new. The Marco Rossi Foundation for Homeless Youth. A shelter. A job training program. A place where kids like Mila could find safety and support. Mila stood beside him at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, holding his hand. Papa would like this, she said. You think so? I know so. Months passed. The lawyer's office. Family court. Don Vero in a suit. Nervous in a way he'd never been facing down rival gangs. I want to adopt her. Legally. The lawyer looked concerned. Mr. Vero, with your background. The courts will be reluctant. Then convince them. I don't care what it costs. I don't care how long it takes. She's my daughter. Make it official. Beside him, Mila gripped his hand tightly. What if they say no? Don Vero looked down at her. This child who'd saved his life, shown him forgiveness he didn't deserve, taught him that redemption was possible. Then we appeal. And if that doesn't work, we figure something else out. You're stuck with me, kid. Promise. On Marco's memory. You're my daughter now. Nothing's changing that. The court battle took months. Character witnesses, background checks, evaluations, questions about Don Vero's past, his business, his ability to provide a safe home. Through it all, Mila was clear. I want him to adopt me. He's kept every promise he's made. He's kept me safe. He's trying to be better. Papa would approve. Finally, the judge signed the papers. Mila Rossi became Mila Vero. The day the adoption finalized, they went to Marco's grave. The three of them, Don Vero, Mila, and Talon, fully recovered now, walking without a limp. Fresh flowers. The grave well-maintained. Mila knelt, touching the headstone. Hi, Papa. I brought someone to meet you properly. Don Vero knelt beside her. Marco, I failed you. I believed lies. I took your life. But I swear to you, brother, I'm spending the rest of mine protecting what you loved most. He pulled Marco's ring from his pocket, the one he'd taken from Marco's body 5 years ago and kept ever since. He placed it on the grave. I'm raising your daughter, teaching her everything good you would have taught her. She's brilliant, brave, and has more honor than I ever had. Mila leaned against his shoulder. Papa used to say you and he played chess every Sunday. Will you teach me? Every Sunday. I promise. Mila spoke to the stone, her voice soft. Papa, I miss you. But I'm okay now. Don Vero keeps me safe. Talon keeps us both safe. We're a family. A weird, broken family. But it works. Talon lay down beside the grave, peaceful, his job done. He'd protected Marco's daughter. Brought her together with the man Marco had trusted. Given them both a chance to heal. Don Vero stood, picked up Mila. Ready to go home? Home sounds good. 1 year later, Mila's 10th birthday. The penthouse was full of people. Sal, Tony, Big Pete, Carlos, Jimmy, all with their families now. Kids running around, laughing. Normal life, as normal as it could be for people with their history. Cake, presents, music, joy. Mila wore a new locket now. One side held her old photo of Marco holding her as a baby. The other side held a new photo, her, Don Vero and Talon, all three of them smiling. Past and present, loss and healing, all captured in silver. She was playing with other kids her age. Actual friends. Going to a good school. Seeing a therapist twice a week to work through 5 years of trauma. Living a life that looked almost normal from the outside. Don Vero watched from the kitchen, a slight smile on his face. Sal appeared beside him. You've gone soft, boss. Maybe. Or maybe I finally got it right. Marco would be proud. I hope so. Mila ran over, grabbing his hand. Come on. We're playing hide and seek. I'm too old for hide and seek. You're never too old. Papa used to play with me. The words didn't hurt anymore. Or they did, but in a different way. A healing way. A way that honored Marco's memory instead of being destroyed by guilt. Okay, Don Vero said. But I get Talon on my team. That's cheating. All's fair in love and hide and seek. Mila laughed, pulling him toward the other kids. And Don Vero, the Lion of New York, the man who'd ruled the underworld with fear and violence, played hide and seek at his daughter's birthday party and felt more powerful than he'd ever felt running an empire. Because this was real power. This was worth protecting. This was worth changing for. Later that night, after the guests left, after Mila fell asleep on the couch with Talon's head in her lap, Don Vero stood at the window looking out at the city lights. They said you couldn't change the past. That some debts could never be repaid. That blood spilled left stains that wouldn't wash out. Maybe they were right. Don Vero would never get Marco back. Mila would never get the childhood she lost. Talon would always carry the scars from the bullet that nearly killed him. But sometimes broken things fit together better than whole ones ever could. A crime boss learned that power without love was just another cage. A little girl learned that family wasn't always blood. A loyal dog proved that love transcends even death. The Lion of New York fell in an alley, betrayed and bleeding. He was saved by the smallest, bravest souls he'd ever met. And in protecting them, he finally saved himself. Don Vero looked at the couch where his daughter slept, safe and warm, protected by a dog who'd already given his life for her once, and would do it again without hesitation. He looked at the life they'd built from ashes and pain and impossible forgiveness, and he smiled. "Thank you, Marco," he whispered to the night, "for trusting me, for sending them to save me, for believing I could be better." Somewhere, in whatever place good men went when they died, Don Vero hoped Marco heard him. Hoped his brother knew that his daughter was loved, protected, and finally home. The past couldn't be changed. But the future? That was still being written. One day at a time. One promise kept at a time. One moment of choosing love over power, forgiveness over revenge, hope over despair. The lion had fallen, but something better had risen in its place. A father, family, a second chance. Thank you for watching the story unfold, for staying through every twist and turn, every moment of pain and hope. Stories like this remind us that redemption is possible, that forgiveness can come from the most unexpected places, and that love is always worth fighting for. What moment in the story hit you the hardest? Was it when Don Vero discovered Mila was Marco's daughter? When Talon took the bullet? When they became a family? Drop a comment below and let me know. I love hearing what resonates with you. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories that explore the depths of human nature, and turn on your notifications so you never miss a tale that might change how you see the world. These stories exist because you're here to listen. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until next time, remember, sometimes the people we hurt the most become our greatest teachers, and the debts we can never fully repay become the fuel for becoming someone worth of that second chance. This is Story Lens TV, where every story reveals a truth worth discovering. Until we meet again.